Something important just happened in Pittsburgh, and if you've been following the way this roster has been evolving, this move says a lot about what the organization is trying to build going into the 2026 season. The Pittsburgh Steelers have made a significant addition to their offense by acquiring wide receiver Michael Pittman Jr. from the Indianapolis Colts, sending a late-round pick in this year's draft in return. According to a person with knowledge of the deal who spoke to the Associated Press on the condition of anonymity because the trade had not yet been made official, the Colts agreed to send Pittman to Pittsburgh as the Steelers continue reshaping their offensive identity. When you look at this move closely, it becomes clear that this is not just a depth addition. Michael Pittman Jr. arrives in Pittsburgh with a very solid resume and the type of experience that the Steelers have been searching for at the wide receiver position. Since entering the league as a second-round pick in the 2020 NFL Draft, Pittman has quietly built a reputation as one of the more reliable receivers in the league. Over the course of 6 seasons in Indianapolis, he recorded 485 receptions, accumulated 5,254 receiving yards, and scored 25 touchdowns. Those numbers show consistency, durability, and the ability to be a dependable target over multiple seasons. Even in the 2025 season, Pittman continued to produce. He finished the year with 80 catches for 784 yards and 7 touchdowns, proving that he can still contribute at a high level. For a Steelers team that has been looking for more balance and more threats in the passing game, that type of production matters a lot. What makes this move even more interesting is how it fits into the bigger picture of Pittsburgh's offense right now. The Steelers already have a physical, high-profile receiver on the outside in DK Metcalf, who the team acquired in a trade with the Seattle Seahawks last year. Metcalf's presence immediately changed the way defenses approached Pittsburgh's passing game, but the reality is that he often faced constant double coverage throughout the 2025 season. That defensive attention showed up in the numbers. Metcalf finished the year with 59 receptions and 850 receiving yards, which ended up being a career low in yardage. Defenses clearly focused on limiting him as the primary threat. And late in the season, things got even more complicated when Metcalf was suspended for the final 2 regular season games after making contact with a fan during a game in Detroit. With that situation unfolding, it became even clearer that Pittsburgh needed another legitimate receiver who could take pressure off Metcalf. That's exactly where Pittman fits in. At 28 years old, he brings size, experience, and proven production. Now imagine a scenario where opposing defenses can't simply double Metcalf on every passing down anymore. If Pittman lines up on the opposite side, defenses will have to make difficult choices about where to focus their attention. And this move also connects directly to the broader changes happening inside the organization. The Steelers are entering a new era on the sideline after hiring Mike McCarthy in late January to replace longtime head coach Mike Tomlin. With a new head coach comes a new offensive vision, and everything the team is doing this offseason seems to point toward building a more dynamic and balanced offense heading into 2026. But there is still one huge question that remains unresolved, and it could ultimately determine how impactful this receiving duo becomes. The quarterback situation. Right now, the Steelers remain unsettled at the position. The team has not closed the door on the possibility of Aaron Rodgers returning after the 2025 season. Rodgers delivered a year that was solid, though not spectacular, and the idea of him returning for a 22nd season is still being discussed. However, Rodgers has not committed to that possibility yet. If he were to come back, it would also mean a reunion with Mike McCarthy, the head coach who worked with Rodgers during their years together in Green Bay. So now you start to see the bigger picture forming. Pittsburgh is assembling weapons. They now potentially have 2 tall, physical receivers on the outside in DK Metcalf and Michael Pittman Jr., something that could dramatically change how their passing game operates in 2026. And when you look back at last season, this change feels even more necessary. The Steelers' receiving production outside of Metcalf was minimal. In fact, 4 of the team's top 5 leading receivers in 2025 were either running backs or tight ends. That tells you everything about how limited the wide receiver group was. Calvin Austin, 3 finished with 31 receptions, which ranked only 6th on the team, highlighting just how little impact the rest of the wide receiver room had. Adding Pittman directly addresses that problem. Now the big question becomes how quickly this new combination can come together and whether it can truly transform Pittsburgh's offense heading into the 2026 season, because if Pittman performs the way he has throughout most of his career, and if Metcalf benefits from having less defensive attention, this offense could suddenly look very different from what Steelers fans watched last year. But that brings us to the real debate among Steelers fans right now. Does adding Michael Pittman Jr. actually give Pittsburgh one of the most dangerous wide receiver duos in the AFC, or does the success of this move depend entirely on what happens next at the quarterback position? Once you start connecting all the dots, this move by Pittsburgh begins to look less like a simple roster adjustment and more like a clear signal about where the team believes it needed to improve the most after the 2025 season. The reality is that the Steelers' passing game struggled to consistently threaten defenses, and a big reason for that was how predictable the offense became when it came to wide receivers. Defenses understood that DK Metcalf was the primary outside weapon. With no other proven receiver demanding the same level of respect, opposing coordinators could focus their game plans around slowing him down. Double coverage became common, and sometimes even triple attention showed up in key situations. When that happens, even a physically dominant receiver like Metcalf can find it difficult to produce explosive plays on a regular basis. That's why the addition of Michael Pittman Jr. carries so much potential importance. Pittman is not just another name added to the depth chart. He is a receiver who has already proven over multiple seasons that he can handle a high volume of targets and still produce. His 485 career receptions and more than 5,200 receiving yards show a player who understands how to get open, how to work different areas of the field, and how to be a reliable option when a quarterback needs a dependable target. For Pittsburgh, that reliability could be exactly what the offense has been missing. When you imagine this offense lining up next season, you suddenly see a different picture. On one side, you have Metcalf, one of the most physically imposing receivers in the NFL. On the other side, you have Pittman, another big-bodied target with proven production. Both players have the size and catch radius to win contested passes, and both can stretch defenses vertically when given the opportunity. That combination alone could force defenses to rethink how they approach the Steelers. Instead of being able to focus their attention on a single receiver, defensive backs will now have to account for two legitimate threats on the outside that can open up the middle of the field, create more favorable matchups, and give the offense more flexibility in how it designs plays. It also has the potential to create opportunities for other players who were somewhat limited by the structure of last year's offense. Think about what happens when safeties are forced to stay deeper to respect the outside receivers. Suddenly, running backs and tight ends have more space underneath. Passing lanes become cleaner. The entire rhythm of the offense can change. And that seems to be exactly what the Steelers are aiming for as they enter this new chapter with Mike McCarthy leading the team. Bringing in a veteran wide receiver with Pittman's experience suggests that the organization wants to accelerate the offensive transition rather than slowly rebuild it. But as promising as this pairing looks on paper, there is still the same looming question that continues to hover over the entire situation. Who is going to be throwing them the football? The Steelers have kept the door open for Aaron Rodgers to return, and that possibility alone adds another layer of intrigue to everything that is happening right now. Rodgers already delivered a season in 2025 that showed he could still manage an offense and move the ball, even if the results were not always spectacular. If Rodgers were to come back for what would be his 22nd season in the NFL, the connection between him and Mike McCarthy would immediately become one of the most talked about storylines in the league. The two spent years working together in Green Bay, building one of the most productive quarterback-coach partnerships of that era. Now imagine that reunion happening in Pittsburgh, with two large physical targets like DK Metcalf and Michael Pittman Jr. on the outside. It's easy to see why the Steelers might believe their offense could take a major step forward if all the pieces fall into place. At the same time, nothing about the quarterback situation has been finalized yet. Rodgers has remained non-committal about returning, and until a decision is made, the entire outlook of the offense remains somewhat uncertain. The Steelers clearly believe that improving the receiver room was a necessary step regardless of who ends up under center, and from a roster-building perspective, that strategy makes sense. Strong receiving options help any quarterback, whether it's a veteran like Rodgers or someone else stepping into the role. What we do know is that Pittsburgh recognized a problem in its offensive structure last season. Too much of the receiving production came from running backs and tight ends, and the wide receiver group outside of Metcalf struggled to make a consistent impact. By bringing in Pittman, the team has directly addressed that weakness and potentially created a much more balanced passing attack. Now the next phase will be seeing how everything fits together once the season approaches. Chemistry between receivers and quarterbacks takes time. Offensive systems take time to fully install, and expectations can sometimes look very different once the games actually begin. But one thing is certain, the Steelers have made it clear they want their offense to look different in 2026. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think Michael Pittman Jr. and DK Metcalf can become one of the most dangerous receiver duos in the league if the quarterback situation works out? Or do you still believe the Steelers need to make another big move before this offense truly reaches the next level? And when you continue looking at the ripple effects of this move, another layer of the story starts to appear. Because adding a player like Michael Pittman Jr. is not just about the numbers he produced in Indianapolis. Indianapolis, it is also about the type of presence he brings into a receiver room that clearly needed another proven voice. Last season showed how thin the Steelers' wide receiver production became once defenses focused heavily on DK Metcalf. When a team's top 5 receivers include 4 players who are running backs or tight ends, that tells you the passing structure was forced to rely on shorter routes, checkdowns, and underneath concepts far more than the coaching staff probably wanted. That type of offensive balance can work in certain stretches, but over the course of an entire season, it becomes easier for defenses to anticipate what's coming. Bringing Pittman into the equation gives Pittsburgh something it simply did not have enough of last year: a second wide receiver with a long track record of consistent production. Over 6 seasons, he has shown that he can handle a large role in an offense, move the chains, and operate in contested situations. That reliability becomes extremely valuable in key moments of games, especially on third down, when quarterbacks are often looking for a receiver they trust to win a physical matchup. Another interesting aspect of this situation is the timing of the move. The Steelers did not wait until the draft to address the position. Instead, they used a late-round pick to bring in a veteran who has already proven himself in the league. That decision suggests the organization wanted a more immediate solution rather than relying solely on a rookie developing over time. For a team trying to reshape its offense under a new head coach, that approach makes sense. Mike McCarthy is stepping into Pittsburgh with the expectation that the offense will evolve, and having 2 experienced receivers on the outside could make implementing that system smoother. Veteran players tend to adjust to new schemes faster because they have already seen multiple offensive systems during their careers. It also sends a message to the locker room. When a team makes a move like this early in the offseason, it signals that the front office is serious about improving the offensive side of the ball. Players notice those things. They see when management identifies a weakness and takes action to fix it. For Steelers fans, the most exciting part of this move might simply be imagining what the offense could look like if everything clicks. Picture an opposing defense trying to decide where to focus coverage when both outside receivers are legitimate threats. If the defense leans too heavily toward Metcalf, Pittman could become the primary target. If the defense shifts attention toward Pittman's side, that could create more single coverage opportunities for Metcalf. That type of balance is exactly what good passing offenses try to create. And it is important to remember that Pittman's production last season still showed he can contribute in a major way. His 80 receptions, 784 yards, and 7 touchdowns in 2025 demonstrate that he remains a dependable option who can still make plays. For Pittsburgh, that level of output from a second receiver would already represent a major improvement compared to how the passing distribution looked last year. Of course, all of these possibilities eventually circle back to the same unresolved question that continues to shape the conversation around the Steelers' offseason: the quarterback. Everything about the ceiling of this offense depends on who ultimately takes control of the huddle. The team has not closed the door on Aaron Rodgers returning, but at this moment, he is not committed to playing another season. If he does decide to come back, the reunion with Mike McCarthy would instantly become one of the most fascinating storylines in the league. At the same time, until that decision becomes official, the Steelers are operating in a space where they must prepare for multiple possibilities. That is another reason why strengthening the receiver group makes sense. A deeper and more reliable group of targets benefits any quarterback who ends up leading the offense. What is clear right now is that Pittsburgh did not want to repeat the offensive structure of 2025. The lack of wide receiver production outside of Metcalf